Welcome to Justice Counts, the podcast that goes beyond the law to what's important to you. Equal justice for all is a guidepost for our nation, but how do we achieve that? Here are your hosts, writer-commentator Bob Gatty and novelist-attorney Mark M. Bello.
Today we're joined by Mick Grewal, founding and managing partner of Grewal Law, based in Michigan. He's joined by David Mittleman, a partner in his law firm. Recently, Mick and Dave represented 111 of the 333 survivors in the lawsuit against Michigan State University involving the former MSU doctor Larry Nassar. This is the largest settlement against the university for a personal injury claim involving sexual abuse. Mick and his team are continuing their battle for justice and change, representing 139 of the 543 survivors against USA Gymnastics and the United States Olympic Committee. So Mark, take it from here.
Gentlemen, I'm so happy we finally got together. I'm proud to have you on my show. I want the audience to know that we all coincidentally went to the same law school. So I'm like honored to be in your presence. I'm interested in the size of this undertaking. How did you guys get involved in this case in the first place? What was your practice like at the time? And how do you prepare for such a massive undertaking, taking on a Goliath defendant like Michigan State University and the ancillary defendants involved? What do you do? Shut down your whole practice to handle something like this?
Let me address this question, Mark. David and I have known each other for pretty much my whole legal career. David, I'm honored to say, is one of my mentors. So as time went on, I had my own practice, and David and I decided to join forces actually in 2016. It was just very ironic that before Michigan State case started, David and I joined together, and Grewal Law had a large personal injury practice. I think it was October 16th of 2016. Actually, I think that's the exact date. It's going to be 5 years very soon, David. And
Mazel tov.
Thank you.
Mazel tov. And then I remember when this case came down, it was actually in December, and David was reading the Lansing State Journal. I was actually getting ready to go out of the country. And we had a couple clients that knew the firm, knew the name, knew David and I, and they retained us. And I remember David asking me this question: what if more cases come in? And I just told him, as I was leaving the country, let's just sign them up because we have to do the right thing. We never knew at that moment that there was going to be that many survivors and the Nassar case would be so big. I do want to correct one small thing that Bob said on his opening statement per se. We were the largest sexual assault case that settled. Since that time, USC has settled. That case is for $849 million. I think they had 800 plus survivors, but they used the Michigan State model. So what we did in Michigan State has been modeled across the country, at least at this time frame. How did we do it? You can't say no to a victim or somebody who's been assaulted or injured. Our job is to listen to them, believe them, and advocate on their behalf. We delegated within the law firm. David and I basically talked to survivors individually, and we formed relationships with them because their trust was breached. And because their trust was breached, they had to create trust again with the attorneys and with our law firm. And some of the people would talk to us individually. Some would only want to talk to our women on our staff. And we had to be very open to that conversation to make sure that they felt secure and safe. And what they wanted to share with us was completely confidential, Mark. And I can't stress that enough. Confidentiality is so important for all survivors because they're opening up a very dark part of their mind. And in order for them to heal, they got to have trust and know that what they're going to say to us is confidential until the point comes if they want to speak publicly. we had enough people on our team to do it, but we also had enough people to actually grow the practice and stay within our practice areas. We still did personal injury, we still did family law, criminal law, employment law. We did all that, but David and I predominantly were handling the Nassar case.
How would you say that handling a case like that or cases like that differ from the typical cases in your practice? And by the way, did you have a subspecialty already when you took these on in sexual abuse cases?
Let me take a shot at that, Mark. And Mick is being rather modest by not really letting your listeners know how we changed from October 16, 2016, from 5 lawyers, 11 staff, and 1 office to what we became within 2.5 years following us getting together, 15 lawyers and 30 staff, 3 locations, Grand Rapids, Northville, in addition to our Okemos space. So, yeah, I mean, I already had a full practice coming from Church Weibel. I think Mick may have said that Grewal Law had a personal injury practice, but it was Church Weibel that had the personal injury practice, and we morphed it into Grewal Law. And the first 35 years of my practice after graduating Cooley Law School, my career as a trial lawyer on the side of people focused on representing injured people as a result of someone's negligence. A doctor making a mistake, a driver of a vehicle not paying attention, a premises or landowner not taking care of their property, and as a result, injuries occur. Some very serious, death, quadriplegia, blindness, and those are all serious, except for one case into about my 20th year. Well, no, must have been earlier after that, 25th. I was asked to represent a lawyer retained by him after 4 or 5 other law firms turned him down on a claim that he had of clergy sex abuse. He had a repressed memory, 50 years. He was 55 years old when he came to me. And this repressed memory of him being molested by a Catholic priest came flowing back to him on an occasion where he was taking some presents back to the orphanage for Christmas. And we couldn't file a lawsuit, and he understood that because law in Michigan didn't allow for a claim to be brought beyond the statute of limitations. But I kept pressing and kept working for him. We convinced the Lansing diocese to pay him a considerable amount, had a press conference, and it established my name in the sexual assault arena, if you will. And so I probably talked to 5 or 6 dozen survivors, mostly men, some women. And I learned a lot about what Mick was talking, this breach of trust. And the breach of trust causing the post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, is a profound injury that manifests itself in emotional and physical ways, perhaps beyond that of any that I have seen as a result of someone's negligence. It's when somebody you trust, a doctor, a priest, a rabbi, a coach, abuses their reputation and position in the world to take advantage of and molest young people typically. And it is a trauma that never goes away. It's not always there, but it never goes away. Sometimes it manifests itself with physical issues and sometimes just emotional. But from our clients that retained us when they spoke at the pre-sentence hearing, we heard from a mother of a young girl that took her life, and she believes was as a result of being molested and having MSU not step in to protect her. This didn't happen in a vacuum. It wasn't just Larry Nassar. It was those who enabled him and were complicit that allowed him to go on for as long as he did. So anywhere from death to long-term institution, short-term institution, outpatient therapy, self-harm, the physical manifestations not only affect the survivor, but all the relationships that the survivor has with spouses, with parents, and the guilt, and it is traumatic. What I'm saying is the last 5 years of my 35 years have been different in terms of the magnitude and enormity of the damage done.
Let me just add something to what David's talking about. This trauma that all these survivors have, it's not just trauma created by the perpetrator, this betrayal trauma. I mean, that's the true thing. They have been betrayed. They've been betrayed by a doctor, betrayed by a coach, betrayed by an institution. And now we have, and we're going to use Nassar as the example, we have Michigan State, but we also have the Gymnastics Association and the Olympic Committee. This betrayal trauma is so profound that it affects everything in their lives. Can you imagine not being able to wanting to go to a doctor for any type of an examination? Can you imagine not being able to wanting to go do gymnastics because that was something that you were passionate and you wanted to go to the Olympics? And I'll jump into another hat right now because I'm involved in the Michigan case. Our firm is doing it. Can you imagine not wanting to root for your team because the university betrayed you? So this betrayal trauma is very significant, and it's something that all these survivors have to endure for their whole life. It waxes and wanes. It depends on the circumstance, but it's something it just doesn't go away, and it will never go away. They have to learn to live with it, grow from it. And in reality, I think David taught me and found that there was what's it called, David? PTG, post-traumatic growth.
You know, it's so interesting. We kind of had the opposite experience. Early in my career, I handled a sexual abuse case with dealing with the Catholic Church. And to your point, Mick, I wrote a book on the subject called Betrayal of Faith. And the betrayal theme that you speak of is a big part of all of the novels that I've written in the social justice arena. But that was the first, and it was based on that actual experience that I had in my 30s of pursuing this Goliath defendant, the Archdiocese of Detroit, and having religious organization, these people that their parishioners trust, betray them in such an abhorrent way. So I'm with you 1,000%. I know exactly what you're talking about, and I lived it for 5 years back in the 80s.
Yeah, I mean, what you're saying right now is people are using God as a way to get around sexually abusing. People are using doctors. You know, when you go to a doctor, I mean, when you see right now, most cases where doctors in a position of authority are abusing people or have abused people for decades. What are you supposed to say? I feel uncomfortable because I went to a doctor. Very few people want to talk about it.
More than that, there's a guilt also. And how can you sue your church? How can you do? You're the victim. The victim is the perpetrator all of a sudden.
Not only that, Mark, but as you know, the priests that abused the young boys typically told them two things. Now, this is the messenger of God for them. They said, if you tell anyone, you'll be damned in hell. And two, if you, no one's going to believe you. And back in the late 60s, early 70s, no one did believe the young boys, including their parents. And when their parents then said, oh, I don't want to hear it again. Don't say that. So You're betrayed by the messenger of God, that you're betrayed by the person who you thought loved you the most. So what did we have here at MSU? We had Coach Klages, who was sentenced for lying to the authorities during the course of an investigation, who was the head coach of the MSU women's gymnastics and overseeing Jenison Fieldhouse, where much of the abuse occurred, when one person in 1997 came forward as a 16-year-old and said, understand, this is someone who's never gone to a gynecologist, never had a vaginal exam, but she said to the coach, something strange is happening, something I don't know, I don't understand. And the coach told her, you're misunderstanding legitimate medical treatment, and you should be lucky that you're being treated by the doctor who treats the United States Olympic gymnast. And then she did the exact opposite thing of what you're supposed to do as a mandatory reporter. As a mandatory reporter, you're supposed to immediately report it out to an outside authority like Child Protective Services if you suspect child sexual assault, and if you're in an organization, up to your supervisor. Instead, she conducted her own internal investigation, embarrassing and humiliating this young 16-year-old by bringing in all the other gymnasts that were in the area. It was a junior club summer camp situation. So there were 8 to 10-year-olds, 10 to 12-year-olds, 12 to 14, and 16-year-old group. Brought them all in. One 14-year-old corroborated what Larissa, she's out and very open and outspoken to protect her children. She was 30 years old when she came to us, a married mother of 4. But anyhow, after this investigation, the coach held up a piece of paper and said, I could file this, but it'll have very serious consequences for you and Dr. Nassar. Well, as a 16-year-old, she put her tail between her legs, scampered out. Not only didn't the coach have the respect to at least mention it to her parents, she didn't. She told Nassar. And so when she was supposed to go to her next appointment, Nassar was already prepared and put his arm around her, said, oh, honey, I'm so sorry you're misunderstanding medical treatment, and did it, according to her, more dramatically, harder, faster. And she thought she had done something wrong. Like you say, Mark, she felt guilty to the day she came in to see us, until the Title IX investigation done in March of 2017 finally said, this is not a legitimate medical treatment. This is sexual assault. Did she realize that she had been violated in such a fashion?
And the grooming that went on, Mark, in every instance of sexual assault, there's a fashion of grooming. Here with Nassar, Nassar groomed all these young women in such a way that the story that David was telling you about, she had to convince herself that this was a legitimate medical treatment. And I remember talking to her, even after she hired us, and even after the child pornography was found on Nassar's computer, she still convinced herself that it was still legitimate, because that's how she could cope with herself for so many years. And then you got to think of all the parents. I think you said all the parents that were in the room too. This could have happened.
I remember in my case, to Dave's point about, keep your mouth shut. It wasn't like that. It was the priest in my case made the abuse sound like a religious ritual. The Lord loves clean bodies. I remember him vividly saying stuff like that to the victims to justify taking a shower with them. But anyway, the focus of this podcast, as you guys know, is on the word justice, and critics of what we do like to say that large damages awards are ultimately paid by consumers, and we get stuck with price hikes, and they don't curb bad conduct at all. Besides significant money being thrown around in these cases, what do you and your clients achieve in situations like this? I kind of know the answer, but I'd love to hear your opinions on the issue.
Well, I'm gonna start off with one thing. You know what? Before Nassar, victims were not listened to at all. Since those women came up to a world and talked about what happened to them. For the first time in history, victims are being actually listened to and believed. They were always discounted and shamed. And don't get me wrong, that is still going on right now. I mean, if you want to compare and contrast, do you remember in the Penn State case? Did you hear about those 20 to 30 survivors? Did you hear their gruesome stories that happened to them? No, you didn't hear them in a public forum. People still did not believe these women. So when they talked in front of Judge Aquilina and Judge Cunningham, for the first time, survivors are being listened to. And because of that and the Me Too movement, you're seeing more survivors willing to come forward to talk, to share their stories, to help change the culture. That's one of the biggest things that's happening right now, helping change the culture. It's slow because we're fighting institutions, we're fighting organizations, we're fighting the church. They don't want to see change, but change is coming. So to me, that's one of the best things that is coming out of this, the ability for a survivor to come talk, for people to listen to them and to believe them without the necessity of having them cross-examine on a trial.
Hopefully it'll happen quicker than it did in the Catholic Church.
I agree. There's no question that the non-monetary demands that were made by us on behalf of our survivor clients weighed more heavily than the monetary. No one came to us and asked, how much will we be getting at the end? They each, well over 100, wanted change, and they wanted this to never happen again and to be vocal about it because of the breach of trust, the very concept that Mick started with. They're all in a process once it occurs. They're in different parts of the process, and regaining control and regaining the ability to have relationships is all part of it. Having the strength and be brave enough to come forward is a step. Filing a lawsuit that they know that's going to be public, although it may be anonymous, and most of them were initially. But as time came forward, they realized that to really make a statement, they had to use their real names, and they did. These are very brave and strong, courageous women. The change that we are seeing by way of the example, it's changed to the structure of the way the university operates. The policies that are changing, such as what they had at the Caroli Ranch, where the Carolis, who trained for years with the Eastern European elite, very tough, strict disciplinary, they had a camp that was out in the woods in Texas with poor satellite communications. The parents couldn't visit, and there was only one doctor allowed to be on the campus, and that was Nassar. That's not going to happen anymore. There not going to be any camps like that where we're training our elite athletes. Nassar, with the assistance of coaches like the Carolis and at MSU, we're not going to tolerate that. When you boil down what happened to the finest, smallest crucible, these universities, and it's true at Michigan as well, used these young people and sacrificed their safety simply to win gold medals and first places. And that's not what the parents of these young people, and not what these young people were told when they agreed to attend the university. They thought they were going to be protected.
Yeah, it's not about gold.
How about just a second person in the room for crying out loud?
That on the medical side, that's 101. Chaperones will be used. Gloves will be worn for invasive and informed consent. You can't do the types of procedures that, well, not procedures, it was molestation. It just violates the basic tenets of Medicine 101. Go ahead, Mick.
And let me also tell you, Mark, I'll give you the example. This is not about the money. This is about change. This is about healing. In the Michigan State case, the first 333, we settled for 500 million. We're now, and I got to be very careful here because we're in mediation in USAG and the Olympic Committee, but documents were filed last week of a plan for a potential $425 million settlement for an additional, I think there's 520 survivors.
Incredible.
It's less than Michigan State because they're not here to talk about money. They're more interested in non-monetary change, restorative justice, so this never ever happens again. That's a Nassar case. Now I'll jump into the Michigan case. All the people that we're talking to in Michigan, you know what the biggest thing that came in all my conversations with hundreds of survivors? They want to prevent this from ever happening again. Why did this happen to football players, hockey players, coaches, pilots, doctors to be? It happened across the board. And the university knew more instances of knowledge in Michigan than they were in Michigan State. And still, the goal is not to let this ever happen to another young adult, child, middle-aged adult, a human being. We're a society, we're supposed to help protect people, not enable people to be assaulted. And that's what we've done.
But Mick, when you talk about that, talk to me about the process. You mentioned mediation. Are settlement agreements in place or being negotiated that will create protocols to standardize how these things will be dealt with in the future? For instance, we talked about very simply a second person in the room. Are these going to be negotiated rules going forward for situations like this?
In Michigan State,
We'll get the answer to that question right after we return from this message.
there has been change on the campus of Michigan State. It's slow. I mean, right now, because of what happened to the Nassar, they have, if you go to any doctor's office, they have a little sticker over there saying you have a right to a chaperone. They have to wear, like David said, you got to wear gloves. And if it's an invasive procedure, you got to get signed consent. So there has been change. In the USAG case, as part of the plan proposal, because USAG is in bankruptcy, there is a non-monetary aspect plan that's being put in as part of the settlement that's going to incorporate what needs to happen. They call it even a restorative justice plan, because it's always changing, Mark. We don't know what's going to happen in the future, but you got to have survivors as part of the solution so this can never happen again. You got to look at it from their perspective. For every one person that has come forward, there are 9 people that haven't come forward. Just take that in. Out of the 500 or so survivors in Michigan State, there's probably 4,500 people that haven't come forward. Out of the 500 survivors in the USAG, 5,000 people that haven't come forward. Out of the 1,000 survivors in Michigan, there's 9,000 that haven't come forward.
It's interesting that you say that, because you bring me to my next question. Class action / multi-district litigation and the concentration of the one versus the many. How does a lawyer who's handling complex litigation like this deal with the issues that one person is suffering as opposed to the issues that all are suffering? How do you get individual justice rather than broader justice?
Great question. And because we do represent as many survivors as we do, we can't make the allocation amongst them. So that's why an independent allocator would have to review based on certain criteria. Look, as I mentioned, some of the physical injuries and some of the emotional injuries, some people are better equipped to deal with situations. I mean, we had young girls who were penetrated by Nassar over 600 times, and we had some that were penetrated one time, but that's one time too many. Is the 600 more? Not necessarily. Depends who the person is. Perhaps she may be better able to cope with the feelings of the PTSD. So it's not a class action, although there are some class actions as part of the U of M litigation, I guess, and USC litigation. There wasn't any with MSU, but a retired federal judge sat and reviewed the facts, and how the survivor was dealing with what happened to them really made the difference in terms of the evaluation. And the small percentage, say 10%, that may have appealed what they thought was not appropriate, he would tell them, look, we have a finite pot. You've all been in a flood. Some of you have been up to your ankles, some up to your knees, some up to your shoulders. And in the one case, it was over her head. And based on his years of experience and the information he had, he made determination in terms of value. And as Mick has said, that no one came to us with the idea or notion of an amount of money they wanted. Money, though, is the universal language that corporate America understands. And when you're a university, selling education, or you're a church selling religion, unless there is some pain to them from a financial standpoint, the change, the good things that we're looking for don't happen.
Let me make one thing clear, Mark. These sexual assault cases, all sexual assault cases, they're not class action cases. There are attorneys out there that claim that they're class action cases. We all know, at least the three of us on this call, that each individual's damage is unique. There's no uniformity here. So I'll use USC as the example. USC actually settled a bunch of cases, class action, right out of the gate. And then later on down the line, they did a global settlement. And all those people that settled in the class action cases are now going back talking to that class action attorneys. There's complaints being filed because their individual case was not taken into consideration. Also, these are not MDL cases. These cases are all individually handled, bundled together in a global settlement, because sometimes a single voice is not enough. You need a lot of voices to speak loud to make change.
Mick, what is an MDL case? Sorry.
Multi-district litigation, where you have people from across the country, like Roundup. Roundup is a multi-district litigation, even though everybody has different values. Because they're filed throughout the country, they'll eventually be brought to a single federal judge who will take jurisdiction over it, and they'll create a steering committee, and the case will be tried and settled there. But they're still broken up by an allocator, an individual special master who has the ability to evaluate the cases. Because if you have more than one case, we're not in a position to evaluate the cases. I mean, one of the things I think David and I did best is our empathy. We actually had the ability to listen to clients and truly believe what they're saying. And that's what they need for their healing journey. The monetary aspect comes later on down the line, and that's done through a neutral allocator, and a grid is created that takes all the factors into consideration on how people were assaulted and damaged and what occurred during their lifetimes. Not a class action, Bob, not multi-district litigation. These are all individual cases, similar in nature, because the perpetrator is the same, the enabler is the same, but the damage is unique.
So individual plaintiffs would obtain their own settlement financially.
Correct. And it's usually done through a special master allocator, and it's done through what's called a qualified settlement fund. If there's a settlement, it's sitting over there while this process takes place for the allocator.
I see.
Are you guys stuck with what he decides, or do you get some input into this?
The clients get to do an individual statement, and sometimes if they want to speak to the allocator, they can on an individual one-on-one basis. And once they get allocated their points or their monetary amount, if they're unsatisfied with it, they can appeal it, because there are funds set aside for the appeals process. But as David stated, it wasn't even 10%, David. I think we had 2% of our clients appealed, and in the appeal process, they were happy with what the judge did.
Oh, I'm glad it's not a one-size-fits-all, that's for sure.
Well, it's very,
The doctors swear an oath to do no harm. Obviously, they did harm in this situation. The Andersons and the Nassars of the world, when something like this happens, they're gone, right? I mean, there's no way they can come back and do this again. Is there?
Well, Anderson is dead. He died in 2008.
I wasn't aware. Okay.
Well, he
Nassar-
won't be coming back. That's for sure.
Nassar is 53 or 4 now, and he's looking at a minimum of 58 more years in prison, in federal prison. So
the sad part about the fact that Anderson is deceased is that in Nassar, they got to confront the person that did this to him, and it helped the process. Here in Anderson, they don't get to confront anybody. You know who they have to confront? The university that enabled this.
Mhm.
So this goes back to the betrayal trauma, Mark. When the university knew this went on and they were told repeatedly, why did they let that happen? And why are they not trying to get this resolved? Same thing with USC. USC, Tyndall out there, he's being prosecuted. Those women are going to have a day to deal with the person that did this to them. So there's a different dynamic sometimes. And we have to take that into consideration as we talk to our clients.
What about the enablers and the criminal aspects of this? Were deans, coaches, directors, board members complicit? And have they faced charges?
they have at MSU. There was a setup, if you will, where Nassar's immediate supervisor, who was the dean of the osteopathic program at MSU, was a fellow by the name of Strample. And turns out it was like the fox guarding the hen house. He was a abuser, and he abused students, and he was convicted of misusing his office. He would have, and the university knew he had a problem as early as 2003, when then former President Simon was provost. And we were able to find out in his 5-year reviews, 2005, 2015, that there was a pattern of problem where he was treating women poorly, and particularly women that didn't acquiesce to his unwanted advances. So they knew. And when we talk about periods of time, Mick, let's not forget our FBI. The organization is supposed to protect the citizens of the United States. They dropped the ball for at least a year and a half. During that period of time, we know of in excess of 100, perhaps 150 young girls that were molested that shouldn't have. It should have been stopped a year and a half before August of 2016. And we're looking seriously at that. They have admitted now that they failed to conduct an adequate investigation fast enough after they found out information that could have saved, if we're talking about 9 for every one that came forward, almost 1,000 young girls and women.
What was the explanation for that?
There is no explanation. There's actually a Senate oversight hearing. I believe it's September 15th on this, because a bunch of senators are really PO'd that this even happened, that the FBI failed to protect citizens, these young women, when they should have protected them. You're talking about the Indianapolis division, I think was it the LA or California division, and the Michigan division. 3 different divisions of the FBI, and they all failed to protect these women.
Just so our listeners understand, the FBI has to consent to be sued, correct?
No. Under the Federal Tort Claim Act, a claim can be brought against them. They have certain protections, not unlike the state of Michigan in the Court of Claims, where you don't have a right to a jury, but the federal judge would be the trier of the facts as well as the law.
Yeah, and going back to your original question about criminal prosecution in Michigan State, There was prosecution of some of the enablers. Part of the problem still is there's still denial, Mark. And this is the sad part. You know, you have 500 people that come forward and said they were assaulted, and you have people that are, I call the fandom. The fandom is so powerful that they don't want to believe to this day that those women were assaulted. The university is still holding 6,000 pages of documents that they refuse to turn over. For what purpose? It will help the healing. And you know what? No, the statute of limitations is run, at least for those misdemeanor cases. They just don't want to look bad, in my opinion. Then you jump over to the University of Michigan. They knew about this over the decades. And in 2018, while we were negotiating the settlement of Michigan State, and they actually were, hammering MSU and they were calling it Nassar U, et cetera. Well, Michigan, their board of regents knew. They had their own internal plan. And in 2018, they failed to disclose it. It had to be another survivor who came forward to tell the paper to bring this out of light in February of 20.
How are the clients doing overall? Are the vast majority of them moving on, or what's the percentage of those who are still experiencing trauma versus those who are doing okay?
They're moving on, but as we stated earlier, there are good days and there are bad days. It would help a lot if you see change, and I'm going to use Michigan State and USAG as an example. With Nassar, they got the fact that he's in prison for the rest of his life. But if they see change, it helps them move forward and heal. So, yes, predominantly I see, because I talk to a lot. I mean, we've gotten to know them very, very well. I like to consider them part of our Grewal family. They call us. I mean, they call us on simple things of a contract thing, if they're buying a house, anything like that, because we built that trust with them and we truly care about them. I mean, we care about our clients. So majority of them are doing well, Mark. Some people aren't. There are bad days. I know a few people that still go to institutions. They have suicide attempts. It's just hard to deal with, especially when they hear more and more what goes on. And let's use Bill Cosby as an example. Bill Cosby was he was convicted. First, he was acquitted. Then he got back because of the Me Too movement, and he got convicted. And then because of a plea bargain, he's let out. They're looking at it from their point of view. They came forward. They voiced that they want change. So when they see it, they have good days, they have bad days.
Dave sent me a series of articles, and one of them caught my eye, that Nassar appealed his sentence based on media bias, for lack of a better way to say it, and the judge caving in, if you will, to media bias and calling Nassar a monster, among other things. And an appeals judge who I have a lot of respect for, and you guys know, Doug Shapiro, dissented to the Court of Appeals decision, said Nassar didn't have a leg to stand on. I'm wondering, he's currently serving 40 to 170 years. He's now appealing that decision, that denial at the Court of Appeals level, to the Supreme Court. What are his chances of a reduced sentence?
Well, that sentence that you just spoke of doesn't begin until the 3 consecutive 20-year terms that federal judge Janet Neff ordered in the child pornography charges.
Even in the end, Mark, first the federal case is going to take precedent, and that term has to be done, as David just said. But in the state case, you got 2 different judges, Judge Cunningham and Judge Aquilina. They both sentenced him to over 100 years, to 100, I think 125 to 175, and I can't remember, 100 to 175. Even if he appeals it, I mean, in Michigan, there's guidelines. I'm sure, as you know, because I used to practice criminal law quite a bit. Even if he got a new sentence, his sentence is still going to be 100 plus years. So this is somebody who's convicted. He's got nothing better to do, and he's using the process because he's sitting there. What else is he going to do? He's never getting out, Mark, ever again.
Well, I'm glad to hear that. I'm sure our listeners are, and I'm sure all of your clients are.
Mick earlier mentioned the acronym PTG, and we use that philosophy with particularly our younger, because we had I don't know, what was the youngest woman that came forward to us, Mick? The first one was 14.
I think we had a 12. I think we had a 12 or 13-year-old.
12, 13-year-olds. So what we tried to impress upon them is they've been through the worst of it. And PTG is post-traumatic growth. And we tried to instill upon them the notion that if you've been able to get through this, the rest of life is going to be that much easier because you're that much stronger. Not that anybody would sign up to get this as a mechanism to cope with daily living, but they have it. And if they use it in the proper way, it can be helpful.
And that's there's so many haters out there, Mark. They think that these survivors come forward for the monetary aspect. Do you really think that they want to be part of this club, that they want to be a sexual assault victim for the rest of their life?
You're asking me that question?
I'm asking your listeners. There's
absolutely not.
There's no amount of money that will compensate them for what they have to endure. But this PTG process, it makes them a stronger person. And we've seen that. I mean, trauma does make you stronger if you can get to the other side.
Well, I just want to say, as a fellow lawyer, as a fellow Cooley graduate, I'm very proud of you guys.
Thank you, Mark.
Thank you, Mark.
You did incredible work. I'm tearing here. It's just an incredible job. I'm very proud.
Let me add one more thing. This did take a toll on David and us. Talking to so many people, believe it or not, it affects you. And I'm now going to tear up too. I mean, I've talked to therapists afterwards. I talked to my wife afterwards. It's not an easy job to listen to people who have so much pain and sorrow in their life. The only thing I relate this to is I think on the other end, they're feeling this pain, sorrow, and anguish. And now they can maybe in their life truly know what happiness is because they've endured this. And I talk about the Nassar survivors. I'm talking about the U of M survivors, talking about the USC survivors, the clergy. We truly care about each and every one of them. And my goal personally is to make change. We're one of the worst states in Michigan right now that we don't even have an open statute window. When you see these other states making change, this is an issue as a human being that you want to help somebody, help them heal.
You just gave me an idea, Mark, that you might want to consider, and Mick helped me. It might be interesting for you to have our wives, Rebecca and Jill, on, and you could find out the real story about how they help support Mick and Dave.
Hey, listen, guys, I handled this case in my 30s in 1982. I've never handled another one. It traumatized me to a level where I just said, I can't do this anymore. So I know exactly what you're talking about, exactly what you've gone through. It took me 30 years to write a book about it. These cases are not fun. Like I said, I'm really proud of you.
I have to say that this has been one of the most remarkable conversations that I've heard in a long time. You guys are just amazing, and the work that you've done has just been incredible. I found it astounding to listen to you talk about the trauma that these victims have endured, not just during the incidents that occurred and the litigation that occurred afterwards, but post that, after that, how it's affected their lives and how it continues to affect their lives. It's just incredible. As a non-lawyer, I find this is to be just a remarkable piece of work that you guys are doing, and I think it's just awesome. And thank God we have people like you guys who are willing to do that.
These guys are heroes, Bob.
No, the heroes are the survivors that have come forward. We are there to help them and advocate. But thank you for your comment. Can I say one more thing to your listeners?
Sure, absolutely.
Any of you that are out there, that if you've ever suffered, just understand that there's people that do believe, and come forward, talk to an attorney, talk to a spouse, talk to a therapist, because truly that's the only way you're going to heal.
Okay. Mick and David, thanks so much for joining us today on Justice Counts. It was an incredible ending and just informative and fascinating conversation that we've just had. And thank you everyone for listening. We'll pause here for a quick message, but I'll be right back with some closing remarks. If you haven't done so already, please check out Mark Bello's Ripped from the Headlines Legal Thrillers, all available online at Amazon and other major online booksellers. He has quite the hero in attorney Zachary Blake, who fights for justice on all fronts. His books are Betrayal of Faith, Betrayal of Justice, Betrayal in Blue, Betrayal in Black, Betrayal High, and Supreme Betrayal. And he has a new book, Betrayal at the Border, just out. For more information, just check markmbello.com.
Thanks for the plug.
Now, until next time, this is Bob Gatty from Mark Bello signing off from Justice
Bye, guys.
Counts.
Bye, guys. Thanks. How are the clients doing overall? Are the vast majority of them moving on, or what's the percentage of those who are still experiencing trauma versus those who are doing okay?
Well, they're moving on, but as we stated earlier, there are good days and there are bad days. It would help a lot if you see change, and I'm going to use Michigan State and USAG as an example. With Nassar, they got the fact that he's in prison for the rest of his life. But it would help if they see change. And
it blows my mind.
Not only that, Mark, but as you know, the priests that abused the young boys typically told them two things. Now, this is the messenger of God for them. They said, if you tell anyone, you'll be damned in hell. And two, if you, no one's going to believe you. And back in the late 60s, early 70s, no one did believe the young boys, including their parents. And when their parents then said, "Oh, I don't want to hear it again. Don't say that." So You're betrayed by the messenger of God, that you're betrayed by the person who you thought loved you the most. So what did we have here at MSU? We had Coach Klages, who was sentenced for lying to the authorities during the course of an investigation, who was the head coach of the MSU women's gymnastics and overseeing Jenison Fieldhouse, where much of the abuse occurred, when one person in 1997 came forward as a 16-year-old and said,